Good morning, colleagues, ladies and friends. First of all, let me extend my warmest congratulations to the Republic of Ireland on the opening of this important national conference on biodiversity. This conference is timely. Now is the time for all countries to scale up ambition and actions to halt biodiversity loss and to be thinking forward to the implementation of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. This national conference will provide an opportunity to review where the Republic of Ireland stands in terms of biodiversity outcomes and to develop a roadmap for further actions. This conference sets an example for other countries to follow as they look at actions to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be adopted at the 15th Conference of the Parties in Kunming, China, later this year. Colleagues, almost 30 years ago, the world community adopted the Convention on Biological Diversity in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with a view to achieving three objectives, namely conservation, sustainable use of biodiversity, and fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. The Convention on Biological Diversity, a global treaty covering all forms of life, provides a framework for action at all levels. Decisions adopted at its governing body, the Conference of the Parties, provide guidance for action. This action addresses goals and targets contained in its strategic plan, as well as proposed activities in thematic program of work and cross-cutting issues. The Conference of the Parties addresses a range of issues related to many stakeholders, sectors, as well as indigenous peoples, local communities, and women, as well as youth. In this way, it plays an important role in bringing together all for concerted actions. The Convention also aims to promote synergies and actions across environmental dimension of development, including issues such as climate change, land degradation, water and food security, and pollution, all of which are among the main drivers of biodiversity loss. Currently, in response to Article 6 of the Convention, almost all Convention parties have developed and revised their national biodiversity strategies and action plans and to implement the Convention and its strategic plan. More than 170 countries have revised or updated their national biodiversity strategies and action plans for the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. We are pleased to note that Ireland is one of the few countries that are going to develop a fourth national biodiversity strategy and action plan. We believe that this important document will provide critical guidance for your actions to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I encourage you to embrace national ambitious targets and actions aligned to the global framework while elaborating on this strategic document. Colleagues, the Convention on Biological Diversity is at a critical moment in history. Science and the evidence gathered has already clearly demonstrated that biodiversity loss continues to accelerate. Nature's capital that supports our future development is at risk. Our future is in jeopardy if we do not take effective actions now to stop this trend. However, we have only partially achieved 6 out of the 20 global biodiversity targets set for 2020, and none were fully met. As recommended in the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook, launched in 2020, to achieve these targets, important transitions are needed in our development patterns, policies, and behaviors. More resources and means of implementation need to be provided. Therefore, we need an ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework supported with adequate means of implementation. Colleagues, the draft framework has been evolving considerably in the past 2 years. It will be difficult for me to share all key elements of it at this stage, as parties hold different visions, ambitions, and priorities. What I can say for sure is that we are in a critical stage of development of this important global framework. As you see, the outcomes from Geneva Biodiversity Conference in March, there is still considerable divergence among parties on the types of goals and targets to be included in the new framework. This is particularly true for quantitative elements. Many recommendations for associated strategies and plans, for instance, on capacity building, on resource mobilization and mainstreaming, etc., for the implementation of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, is still heavily bracketed. A big uphill journey is ahead of us. We have only one more meeting in Nairobi in June to tackle these challenges, and a few months before we adopt the final framework in Kumi. However, not all is negative. We have seen signs of convergence emerging from Geneva. First, texts from Geneva are an important step forward. Second, many parties agree that most of the proposed targets should be included, although they may differ in their formulation. Differences on focus in some targets are being narrowed down. Many parties emphasize that all targets should be simple, clear, and actionable. Thirdly, and more broadly, it seems that all parties wish to see that nature will be put on a path to recovery by 2030 to allow biodiversity and ecosystem services to contribute to human well-being and sustainable development. Many parties emphasize that adequate means and resources to support implementation will be essential. Another consensus reached among parties is that this global framework should be inclusive and participatory for all to take actions or contribute to its implementation, as everyone has impacts on biodiversity. We are pleased to note that your country has recently launched a business and biodiversity platform, which we believe will facilitate actions and partnerships by the private sector for biodiversity. This is a critical initiative, as business activities have significant impacts on biodiversity. Their actions and outcomes are crucial to restore biodiversity and ecosystems and to halt biodiversity loss. This platform will also be an important contribution to the global biodiversity and business partnerships launched under the Convention on Biological Diversity a few years ago, as well as the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda for People and Nature, launched our Conference of our Parties 14. For the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as emphasized by most parties, national biodiversity strategies and action plans are still the main national planning instrument and should contain national targets and actions aligned with the global goals and targets in the framework. Revising national biodiversity strategies and action plans is one step forward, but need to ensure that implementation of the framework is not delayed. Let the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan review be undertaken as the implementation of the existing one continues. In both, the whole of government and whole of society approach is essential, as a successful implementation of the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework depends on the efforts of all involved. We believe that this national conference is a typical example of applying the whole of government and whole of society approach by providing an important opportunity for all concerned to contribute to the elaboration and implementation of your country's 4th National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. We also believe this is an opportunity to mainstream biodiversity into strategies, plans, and activities of relevant sectors and stakeholders involved in the process. Colleagues, at this critical juncture of history, more than ever, we need ambition, follow-up actions to avert the triple planetary crisis which we are facing: climate change, biodiversity loss, and health. Let us work together to develop and adopt an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework with robust means of implementation and ensure that all countries will follow up with national ambition and action through national biodiversity strategies and action plans, as your country does. In doing so, it is important to keep in mind that everybody needs to be on board and contribute, as biodiversity is everybody's hands. I look forward to continue to work with you towards the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in Kunming later this year. Thank you.